Okay, so I'd like to demonstrate how to create a very simple mean stack application. Right? So let's create here under the public directory. That's where we're going to put all the public content. Anything you drop in that public directory is, like the name says, public. Right? So whatever you put in there, anybody can come and see. Anything that's outside of the public directory is not accessible to anyone outside, right? Only to you. Right, you as a developer, right? So let's create here a directory, and I'll put here a directory called lectures, and this is where we're going to be, testing or playing around with certain things as we progress throughout the lectures. So let's create a directory here for this lecture. We'll create a simple mean application, right? So say we'll create a simple blogging application, right? So let's see, let's call it, it's a mean blog, right? All right, so there it is. So in here, just to try it out that we can navigate to this directory, let's get started with a simple HTML file, and we'll call it index.html. So index.html is a very important name. It's a peculiar name. It means that this is, like the name suggests, right? It's the index of this directory, right? If you don't put a file and you try to navigate to this directory, some servers by default will list the content of that directory, right? If you just ask for the directory, right? That's a little bit unsecure, right? That you can just peruse the content of directories of somebody else's machine, but as we said, right, it's public. Anything you put in the public directory is meant to be publicly available to everybody. If you don't want people to actually peruse the content, you can actually put an index file, right? And then this is what, whatever you put in this file is what folks would actually see by default, this index.html. So let's put here and let's create. This is a boilerplate HTML document. Notice that it has a doc type of HTML. Notice it's this is HTML5. So notice it has just HTML. It says this is an HTML document. I'm not going to tell you what version it is. Right? So I'm kind of like backwards compatible with previous versions of HTML. So it's generic HTML. And like all HTML documents, it has an HTML outer tag, right? It says that this is an HTML document made up of two contents, two pieces. One is the head, and the other one is the body. The body contains what actually folks see, right? What gets rendered on the browser, right? Whereas the head contains some meta information that describe the contents, right? Or also describe any dependencies that this document has with other things, right? Maybe dependencies with style sheets or scripts or things like that, who the author is, when this was published, things like that, some meta information. So let's create here some content. We'll say h1 hello world, right? The ubiquitous hello world that computer scientists we love to have to show that this is the simplest of anything, right? Of artifacts. In this case, it's something that describes in big letters. That's why H1. This is it's a header of the biggest size header, and just says "Hello World." So let's. The server is already running. Node server is already running. So I should be able to navigate to this. Let's close this. Goodbye. And let's navigate here. We'll say. Oh my goodness, this is so small. Let's navigate to the localhost 3000. It's this server that is running, and I want to navigate to lectures mean blog. So let's go lectures/mean blog /index.html. So there it is. So we are looking at the content of that HTML document, right? It just says hello world, and that is our very first index page, index HTML page. If I remove the index page and I don't ask for a specific page, by default, servers are configured to nonetheless give you that index page if you don't ask for any specific page. Okay, so if I do this, notice that I still see my hello world, even though it's not shown in the URL. Okay, it's not showing the URL. So that's how servers are configured to work. All right, so let's keep working here. Let's create here a page where we want to be able to post something or create some content that we want to generate. So typically, to be able to do things like that, we would provide some description of what is it that we are expecting from you. So this might be blog post, right? Or maybe post a new blog, right? Right. If we refresh, we have this post new blog at the top, right? Perhaps we want to show an input field where they can type perhaps the title of the blog, right? And maybe some text area where they can fill in the body of the blog. So this might be maybe an input field followed maybe by a button that they can click on that says maybe post and maybe a text area that where they can type the content of the body of the blog, right? So these are all input fields, right? Fields that allows us to create a user interface where the user can interact with the application, right? If we re-render this, notice that we have this very very crude form that folks could interact with us to type in a title, post it, and maybe the content of that blog post, right? Everybody still with me? All right. All right. So this looks very very ugly. So we can start using perhaps some style sheets, right? That could make this a little prettier. So style sheets are documents, right, that can describe the look and feel of other documents, right? So that early on when the HTML just first came out, it used to be that we would write the content, everything in HTML, right, and we would also style right within the HTML. We would say that certain things were underlined, certain things were of a particular color, right, or use a particular font, right within the same HTML page, right? This became unwieldy as pages became more and more complex, right? And clients wanted more and more prettier, more professional-looking pages, right? And the skill sets of creating content and the skill sets of making it look pretty, right? Kind of like we're not necessarily didn't have the same skill set, right? You needed a dedicated skill set of making things look pretty, right? And the skill sets of making things look structurally correct, okay? And so these two skill sets became so complex that they were, their own set of skills were fairly complex enough that you needed folks that were dedicated only to making things look pretty or making things look structurally correct, right? So developers are the ones who might make things look structurally correct, and you might have designers who might make things look pretty, right? And they have their own dedicated languages, right? HTML to structure your documents, and CSS, right? It's a completely different language that allows you to paint or style or create the look and feel of your pages. Yes, right? We're going to borrow a style sheet that allows it to make things look very pretty, very easily make it professional. So we're going to borrow that. One of them is that we're going to use is Bootstrap. Bootstrap is one of those style sheets that is very developer friendly. Okay, it has a lot of things that developers can very easily use, snippets of code, a very well structured code, right? That we can just copy and paste and make things look professional. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the style sheet from here. I'm going to grab Bootstrap CDN, and I'm going to take the whole file. I'm just going to download it, right? And I'm going to declare it as a dependency of this HTML document, right? I'm going to say that this HTML document is going to be dependent on some other document, right? And the way we do that is by using a link. It says the following document needs to be downloaded, and it's going to style this current document that I'm looking at, right? So link href. I'm going to paste that other document. Notice that it lives in some other server, right? Lives at this location, Mac CDN, Bootstrap CDN. So some server is hosting this file. It's going to be downloaded locally, and I'm going to say that the browser should interpret this file, right? The relationship between this CSS file that is downloaded is that it's a style sheet. Okay, so this is a style sheet that will style my HTML document. Yes? Okay. So if I reload my page, it already looks a little prettier, right? It's using a different font. It's a sans serif font, right? It's a little easier for the eye to read, right? Without all those squiggly curves, right? It's much easier. It's easier to read, right? And then it also declares all sorts of classes that allows us to style this and make it look pretty, right? So for instance, one of the things that we don't like here is that notice that there's all this content. Notice that is flushed to the left-hand side. See that? That's very unprofessional, right? The eye is always looking for the white spaces, right? To look proportionality, that things are matched from left to right, that they're centered, that there's flush, right? And things are not abutting. So these are things that have already been captured by this style sheet. Okay. So to do that, to invoke those styles, we're going to embed the content that we already have. We're going to embed it in a div. A div allows us to break up the content structurally, right? It allows us to break it up into rectangles, right, of interest. So this is a rectangle, this is another rectangle, vertically, right? Rectangles that are themselves flush, right, to either side, right, and they add vertical spacing vertically, right? So, and we're going to say that the content of this div is we're going to invoke a style by using a class that is declared by this Bootstrap. We're going to say that is a container. It's a generic container of content, right? And we're going to say save. I'm going to refresh. Notice that already it adds some margins on the left-hand side. See that, right? And it also it's responsive, right? As I resize my page, notice that the margins change, right? Notice that there's kind of a threshold there, right? That is resizing the content, right, and maintaining it center on the page, right? Very much like you would find if you go to CNN or Wikipedia or all these websites, right? A very common structure is to have the content centered, right, and with margins on either side of the page, right? So this container class already adds that look and feel, right? All right. Okay, so we have that. What about this input box and input field? Looks really ugly. So again, the style sheet allows us to add some styling to this to make it look a little more professional. For instance, we can say that form control. Again, it's a class that declared by Bootstrap, right? That adds certain styles that make this input field look a little more professional. There it is. So notice that it expands it, right? So to take up as much width of the page as much as you give it, right? So that it's already mobile friendly, right? When you look at it on a phone, it takes up most of the width of the phone, right? So that it's easier for me to click on it, right, or touch it with my finger, right, and invoke the keyboard for that phone. Same thing for the text area, right? If we give it form control, right, it also makes it flush on either side. And it takes up as much space as you give it, right? Again, making it easy to touch with a finger. For the button, right? That's a standard button. We can override that and make that look a little prettier by giving it a class of btn. Btn, that's another class by Bootstrap, right? And already gives us some roundness, right? Notice that all these have some round. Make it a little bigger. Notice that already it has some highlighting when you click on it. It centers this a little more professional. You can invoke some certain color scheme. Bootstrap declares some standard colors, right, that all work well together. One of them is they're very generic that by names. For instance, primary is a primary color. It has certain semantic colors like danger or info or alert or success or error, right? All these are standard names, right, that have some color associated with them. For instance, primary is blue, success is green, right? Or danger is red, right? So there's all these color schemes, right, that work well. I'm going to stick with primary. Also notice that it doesn't take up the entire width because the default for buttons is to behave and take up as least possible space as possible. But we can override that by saying that I want it to behave as a block item, right? A block item, it takes up the entire width of the page, right? In HTML, when the browser reads the HTML, it parses it, right? It makes a mental model, right, of what it's looking at, of what it's reading, right? That mental model is referred to as a DOM, right, or the document object model, right? It's its interpretation of the characters that you typed in the HTML, right? You can take a look at what the browser thinks that it's looking at, right? If you inspect, right, this inspect is going to be your best friend for the next three months, okay? We're going to be using quite a bit of this inspect. You go right click, you say inspect, right? You can look at the page source. Page source, this is the ASCII file that the browser downloaded from the server, right? It copied it in its own cache, right? And then it read it, right? It read it and it interpreted it. Yes? So this is the HTML that was downloaded, right? This is and you can look at the actual code that was downloaded. But here, when you inspect it, notice that where it says elements, on the right-hand side, this is the DOM, right? This is its mental model of what it understood, right? They're not necessarily the same, right? Because you could write, bad HTML, and the browser will make its best effort, right, to try to understand what you wrote, right? You might have forgotten to close a tag, or you're missing certain elements, right? The browser will fill in the blanks for you. It'll make its best effort, right, to interpret what you meant. Okay? This DOM, this on the right-hand side over here, is what it thinks you said, right? Hopefully, the HTML that you wrote is indeed is well represented by the DOM. We'll make every effort to do that. If you highlight over here on the right-hand side, it'll say, yeah, that H1, that's what I'm rendering on the left-hand side. See that? Right? And that input, that's that thing on the left hand. It's highlighting it. See that? Okay? All right? So this is the DOM on the right-hand side. Okay? It has a graphical representation. You could peruse through it hierarchically. Right? Everybody okay? All right. Awesome. All right. Actually, I'm going to move that button to the bottom. Right? And I'm going to start putting some labels here, right? It's a good practice to label all your input fields and let the user know what it is that you're asking for, right? So for that, we have a label and say that this is, the label says this is the title, so blog title, right? And another label right below for the text area. It's also a good idea to put some white spaces. All these white spaces that I'm adding is for the benefit of the developer, okay? Your code should look beautiful. People that read your code should just find, oh, wow, this is nice to read, right? When you code, you're not coding for yourself, right? You're coding for others, right? Most of the code that you write will outlive you, right? Other folks are going to be reading your code, right? And they're going to have to come back to your code, and the better you can make it, the easier you can make it for them to read it, right? the better the project, the overall project will succeed. All right, so when you're writing, always consider that someone else is going to have to read this. Okay, when you create something, right, your responsibility doesn't end at creating that, right? You know, that's a very first. You know, the project doesn't end when the project is delivered, right? Most of the money that goes into the life cycle of a project, it's actually after it has been delivered. Somebody has to maintain it, right? A lot of the money that goes into a product is maintaining that product. So whatever you can make it easy on yourself to come back next year, right, and come back and make sense of what you wrote, and you have no idea, you don't remember what you were thinking, the better, right? So write code that is pretty to read. Okay, put white spaces. These white spaces are for your benefit, somebody else's benefit. All right. All right. So there we go. So we have a blog title and good if you spell it correctly. So blog content. There we go. So we have the text area to very good. So we have the beginnings of a static content, right? Let's now let's see. What would it look like if you submitted several of these posts, right? If you actually posted some of these posts, what would they look like? So let's make a template of what would they look like. All right. Let's just to keep it simple, we'll do it right here, okay, on the same page, right? So it would probably look like something like an H2, some title, right? Title 1, my first post, right? And underneath, you might have a paragraph where you would have some content that you posted just earlier, right? To get some content, let me go fetch some content. For that, I'm going to go to Lorem Ipsum. Lorem Ipsum is some dummy content that we can use for filling up some content that we don't have content for, but we just want to look what it would look like if we had the content. Yes? It's a technique that is used in publishing all the time, right? So that folks are writing a newspaper or magazine and the editors are not yet done creating the content, but the folks are already thinking of how to lay out the page, right? And they need the content to see what it would look like, right? Even though they don't have the content. So I'm going to paste that in there and see what it looks like. So I'm gonna there we go. There we go. So that's my very first post. Well, let's just do that a couple more times to just see how would that look like. So my first post, my second post, and so this is my third post. So there we go. So we have these posts underneath, right? So that's more or less what it would be laid out, right? And like good software engineers, we identify patterns. We say, ooh, look at that. So this is repeating, right? So somehow we would like this to be in some kind of for loop, right? That's iterating over some array of posts, right? Over some array of objects, right? Where each object hopefully has two attributes, one title and one content. Yes? And as you iterate, you're copying and pasting this over and over and over. Yes? Right? So we're already thinking about this, right? Identifying patterns and how to automate this. Very good. Okay, so we have the beginnings of a static page. We have some input fields that allows us to enter data. And at the bottom we have an example of what it would look like if there were actual data and it would be rendered. Yes? All right, so let's make it try make this for real. So what we're going to do is that we're going to start looking at converting this into a single page application. All right. So let's do that. We're going to be using Angular JS as the single page model view controller library all throughout the semester. So for that, I'll need the library. I'll have to download that library. Let's go fetch that. It's maybe we can go to CDN. So CDNs. So CDNs are code repositories, right? That host libraries such as Bootstrap or Angular very popular libraries are out there, that's their all purpose in life, right? For folks to post these libraries, and as these libraries become familiar, and folks use the same CDNs over and over, chances are that if somebody visited Facebook or Twitter or some very popular website, they already have downloaded these libraries, right? They already have these libraries copied in their browsers, right? And browsers are very lazy, right? If they already have a library, they're not going to re-download it again, right? It says, oh, I already have that library. Even if they visit a page asking for the same library, browsers will say, oh, I already have that library. I'm not going to waste time for downloading those libraries, right? So using CDNs is actually a good practice, right? It improves the performance of your particular page, right? Because chances are that folks have visited much more popular websites before they visit yours. Yes? So they will already have those libraries, so they're not going to waste time re-downloading that content. Yes? So let's go to a popular Angular library. No, that's not it. CDN.js. Is that one? Okay, here's a few. Or we can go to Google. Hosts quite a lot of these libraries. If we go AngularJS, they host everything. So let's copy this. This is Angular 1. Let's copy this, right? And let's paste it in here. And what this is going to do is going to go out to Google and say, hey, Google, I want to download your AngularJS library, right? And make it available in my page, right? And there we have it. We have Angular installed on our machines, on our web page. Okay. What this JavaScript here, notice it says Angular.min.js, right? It downloads the page from that JavaScript from Google, and what it does, this JavaScript, it declares a single variable, a single object, right? Which is called Angular. It declares this one object. That's a very, very powerful object that you can use as we go forward, right? After it's declared right here, right? And we're going to use that quite a bit. All right, and we are going to create our own script, right? And we're going to declare it in app.js. Notice that this one is going to go out to Google to download a JavaScript from some server, whereas this one is a JavaScript that I'm going to host myself, locally on my server. Okay, presumably it's a sibling of this index page. Right? Notice that I'm not navigating anywhere in any directory, so this app.js should be right here. Okay, so there I'm going to create a JavaScript app.js. It's also good practice to have your libraries implemented in separate files as opposed to embedded inside of the page. Right? So we're following good practice here. So here we have our app.js. Notice it's empty. It doesn't do anything yet. But just to check to see that indeed it has downloaded, we can do an alert. Right, it says hello world. Okay, so if we go back to our here, we downloaded. Notice that it says hello world. So yes, our app.js has downloaded. It has downloaded. It indeed it's running. Right. When you download a JavaScript file, it executes everything in there. Right. If you have functions, it declares functions. If you have function calls, it will call those functions. It will execute those functions. If it declares variables, it will declare those variables. Right. And that's a problem, right, which we will deal with a little bit later. Well, it's a feature and a problem, I guess. It's a good thing and a bad thing. Well, we have to deal with the bad things, right? We're not going to deal with just yet, all right? Otherwise, I need to explain what ifs are, but I don't want to do that just yet. Okay, so in my app.js, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this magical Angular object that I didn't declare, right? This JavaScript, right, declares that object, that Angular object, so that this one, declares that Angular object, so it's available to all JavaScript libraries after that. Okay, so that in my app.js, it's totally okay to refer to this variable because it was declared by a previous library, right? And we can say console.log Angular. Console.log, console is a object that is declared by the browser. The browser has an API, right? So that JavaScript was invented so that you can programmatically interact with the browser. You can talk to the browser, right? You can tell it, navigate here, or ask what's the URL, or change the background to blue, or create new content dynamically, okay? So you can interact with the DOM dynamically, right? Programmatically. Yes, with HTML, you interact with the DOM declaratively, right? You declare that you want a header. You declare that you want an input field. With JavaScript, you can programmatically do that, right? You can dynamically tell the DOM, hey, create for me a new header. Create for me 10 headers, right? And 20 paragraphs, right? Programmatically. You can put that in a for loop or an if statement or things like that. You can programmatically generate content. So console is one of those objects, right? So console log will do it will write to the log. Here, let's do something simpler. We'll say hello world, hello world. So if I refresh my page, notice that I don't see anything. It's not alerting to me, but it's actually writing to the console. There it is. There's my hello world, right? This is our poor versions of a debugger, right? We put console logs everywhere. I don't want to see any console log in your source. Right? Do not put console logs in GitHub. I don't want to see any console logs. Yes. Yes, that's what I want you to do. Instead of putting console log, you have a full-fledged debugging environment right here on the right-hand side. You can look at the source. You can look at the app.js. App.js has a single line of code. You can put breakpoints. Okay? So when the page refreshes, you can stop and step through the code, right? That's what I want you to do. No console log, right? I do not want to see console log in your GitHub, okay? So if I refresh, notice that it stops right there. It stops right there, right? So you could put watches, you can put scope, you can put variables, you can look at variables as they change, all sorts of breakpoints. All right? Very good. And then you can say continue. And you can step through forwards and backwards, right? All right, so hello world. We can also say hello console log Angular, right? We can say go ahead. And in the console, notice that it's an object. It's a JavaScript object that has all sorts of really cool functions declared in that object, right? One of them is that we're going to be using quite a bit is a module. Module is a function that allows you to declare different namespaces, right? Very much like you would in Java or C#, you create packages, right? And those are just namespaces, right? It allows you to break up applications, large application, into smaller modules. Yes? That's exactly what module does, right? It declares different modules. So let's do that. We're going to kill that. We're going to say Angular dot module, right? And we can give modules names, right? You can create any number of modules, right? Break up your application into a bunch of smaller modules, and then create a top-level module that loads all the other modules. Yes? So we're going to declare a top-level module, right? That implements a blog app, right? That does not depend on any other module, right? Those square brackets are for dependencies, right? You can declare that this module depends on these other modules, right? Even if you don't depend on anything, you still have to put the square brackets, okay? If you don't put the square brackets, it's as if you're declaring just a simple module, right? All right, so if we reload, it's declaring that module. All right, it declares that module. This is the simplest of Angular applications, right? It's so simple that it doesn't do anything. All right. So let's go a little further. We want this module to be tied to some HTML, right? What we're going to do is that Angular forces you to think in buckets, in 3 buckets, in a model bucket, in a view bucket, and in a controller bucket, okay? So that it forces you to think in the MVC design pattern that has proven so successful in all those server-side technologies we talked about. It's proven so well that we have copied that idea onto client-side development. All right. The HTML will be the view. View is things that interact with the user, things that the user sees, things that are rendered for the user consumption. Right. Okay. So this is our view, and here in the JavaScript, we're going to be declaring logic such as controllers. The controllers are responsible for providing the data for the view to render. The view needs to render something. It needs data to render. Who provides it? The controller. Okay? And typically there is one controller for one view. Although you can have more controllers per view, but the typical thing is to have one view, one controller. View needs data. The controller provides the data. Where does the controller get the data? From the model. The model, right, captures all the various pieces of data, right, and how they relate to one another, right? Actors, they act in movies. Movies have actors, right? Movies have directors. Directors direct, okay? And movies have plots, right? And have posters, right? And have places where it was filmed. All that data is the model, right? The controller doesn't have the data. It goes to the model for the data, and it provides it to the view, right? So the user interacts, clicks here, drags there, it notifies all these events to the controller. The controller processes all these events. It updates the model. It says, "Ooh, there's a new actor. There's a new somebody liked this movie. Somebody favorited this actor." Right? If the model is modified, the controller reads the model and it provides the data back to the view for rendering. Yes, right? More or less that. All right. So let's connect this Angular application to the view. We'll say that ng-app is equal to blog app. Right? This ng-app. What is this? This looks like an attribute, right? HTML is made up of these elements. All these tags that we see, this HTML, head, meta, link, script, these are all called HTML elements, yes? And elements have different behaviors, right? They tell the browser how to render it big, and that this is a label, this is an input field, render different things. And you can configure these things, right? You can configure the elements by using attributes. These are attributes of the elements, right? So this attribute, you can say that the class attribute has a value, right? So attribute and then value. These attributes over here are standard attributes of the standard HTML language, right? Class has a meaning that the browser understands. It means that it needs to be painted in such a way, right? This ng-app attribute is not standard. That's not standard HTML, right? Like the name suggests, it says ng. See that? This suggests that this is an attribute that is declared by Angular, right? Ng, Angular, right? It's an attribute declared by the infrastructure, the Angular infrastructure that we just downloaded right here. This script, see that? Right? It says, wait a minute, what's this attribute? You can create attributes. Is that right? That's new, right? So, well, Angular allows you to redefine the HTML language. You don't like how HTML behaves? You can redefine HTML. You can create your own elements, your own attributes, right? And you want to freak out folks, right? And render unordered lists as ordered lists, or make them behave in different ways that you wouldn't expect. You can redefine the entire HTML language and create brand new ones. One of the things you could do is create new attributes. This attribute, ng-app, is tied to some behavior in the infrastructure. What's the behavior? It will try to map, right, or create a relationship between this content, this HTML a snippet of code and make a relationship with some module that is declared in the Angular side, right? So notice the name, blog app, matches this blog app. See that? Now there is a matching. This is the source code, and this is the view. This is the logic in JavaScript, and this is the view in HTML. Right? Now these two folks are talking to one another. Right? They're related now. Everybody good? All right. So if I refresh, notice that if I misspell this, right, it complains. Right? It complains. ng-app complains and says, oops. ng-app complains is there is no such module with that name. I couldn't find any module with that name, right? But if it does match, it's happy. Okay. Oops. Here. I refresh and it matches. So the two are talking to one another, right? It's still not doing anything yet. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Right, so let's extend that idea of views and controllers, right? So what Angular allows you to do is declare what are the snippets of content that the user wants to see, right? And some portions will be static, some portions will be dynamic. Not everything is dynamic, right? So there could be subsets of the content that are dynamic, and the rest might be static, okay? And so you could say, hey, this snippet of code is dynamic, and who's providing the dynamic content? That controller over there, right? So we need a mechanism to be able to marry these two things, right? To name what is the view, right? And then the associated controller that goes with that view, right? Because that's the dynamic portion. Let's say here that you might have some static content above me, right? You might have here some paragraph, some static content out there. Some static content out there. But the dynamic content is down here. This is dynamic because if I click on this post, I need to tell the controller, right, that something happened, right? And this portion down below is also dynamic because I need the controller is going to give me, right, all the posts so I can dynamically render all these posts. Yes? All right, so let's focus. I only have a couple more minutes, but let's focus on rendering this portion down below, right? Because that looks like it's more interesting. All right, let's do that. So let's do that. Let's say that this is the dynamic portion of the HTML content. I'm going to say that there's going to be some controller that's going to be responsible for this view, right? Somebody who has to provide me data over here. So we can say, we can use another ng attribute. We could say that there's a controller called blog controller, right? The blog controller that is going to be responsible for listening to my button clicks and providing me data for me to render. Okay, and so if I render that, notice that there's complaining saying, hey, you told me that there's a controller that is responsible for this view. Where is it? I can't find it. Nobody's declared it. So let's go back to the JavaScript and declare it over there. We're going to come here and Angular. Not only does it have the .module methods, it has a whole bunch of methods. One of them is the controller. .controller method allows us to declare controllers. Okay, so let's declare a controller. Using that name, blog controller, and the way so this ties it. This ties it to this right here. Okay, when the JavaScript parses this ng controller and sees blog controller, it's going to look for some controller that is named blog controller, and that's where the naming happens. Okay, and but this has a second argument that tells it, hey, I need a constructor, right, to instantiate this controller, right? I need to create an instance of this controller. So we'll create a function of the same name, right? I usually follow the same name just so that I can keep it straight in my head, all right? So that it doesn't have to be called the same thing, right? This could be called, EWQ or whatever. But for my namesake, so I can keep my head straight, right, I use the same name. Right? But that's only convention. That's my convention. It's a good convention. All right, so this is a constructor. So I have a function, and there's my constructor. This is my constructor, right? And I can say console log and say hello from, I can't type today, from block controller. So if I refresh, notice that it says hello from block controller. That function gets called, right, when the ng controller tells me, oh, I'm looking for a controller called XYZ. Ooh, you did declare a controller called XYZ, and that's the controller. And that's a function I'm going to instantiate it, call it, right, and it executes right there. Hello from block controller. Everybody okay? All right. All right, so let's go back. Let's go back here. And so this controller, as we said earlier, it's responsible for providing data to the view. Also, it's responsible for handling any events that occur in the view, such as clicking that button, right? If I want to add things or move things around or drag or whatever, right? Any interaction, the controller is the one responsible for handling all those events. Right now, let's provide some data for the view to render. Okay. To do that, we're going to use what is called a scope. So scope, right? It's a magical object, right? That is provided by the infrastructure, right? If you've done some JSP or ASP programming, you should be familiar with these, or even PHP, right? There are some magical objects or variables that just exist, right? That the outside infrastructure, right, has declared for you, right? For instance, session. Right? Session is one of them. If you've done JSP or ASP, that's a variable that's declared by the overall infrastructure, right? Scope, the same thing, right? And that variable, that variable ties this controller with the view. Whatever happens to the scope, right? It's the two-way communication between the view and the controller, right? If I put something on the scope, if the controller puts something on the scope, it's immediately available on the view. If the view does something to a variable, it'll be available on the scope of the controller. It's two-way, right? It's what we're going to call a two-way binding, right? So let's put something on the scope. Let's put something on the scope. Right? We're going to say $scope dot hello, right? And here we're going to say hello from block controller. So we're declaring a variable on the scope, okay? And now that hello is available anywhere in the scope of this controller. What's the scope of this controller? It extends within the boundaries of this div. Okay, this controller can't do anything to this static content out here. Right? It only has jurisdiction inside of this div. Hence the name scope. Right? The scope of this controller is this div. Right? It can't do anything outside. All right. All right. So since we have declared this hello variable on the scope, it is available here in this inside the boundaries of this div. I can refer to that variable by name. I wish it would be that easy, but it's not. Right? This would be interpreted by the browser as a character, a static character hello. Yes? If I re-render, notice it says hello. Right? It's a static content. Yes? Instead, what I want to do is kind of like escape, right, the browser's interpretation, right? I don't want to say, hey, browser, I don't want you to interpret this content, right? I want the infrastructure to interpret this variable. Yes? I want this to be interpreted as a variable, not as static content. So to do that, we use the following escape sequence, okay? Right? And we say hello, right? These curly brackets is our escape. Says, hey, we're going to jump very quickly into Angular world, right? Evaluate this variable, and then we're going to jump back to HTML. Okay, evaluate this. That's very similar, in ASP or JSP if you use, the pointy brackets %. Yes, same idea. Okay. Right. So if we refresh now, notice that it says hello from block controller. Right. It's data that the controller sent, and now that the view has rendered. Everybody good? All right. Well, that's too dumb. Let's not do that. Right. Let's not do this hello. Okay. That's too trivial. Instead, let's do something a little more interesting. We'll say scope blog posts. How's that? Blog posts, right? And instead of being just a plain old string, we're going to make it an array. Okay? And this array is going to have object instances, right? Such as many object instances. And each object instance is going to have a title, right? Post 1, right? And it's going to have a content 1, right? Okay. And let's create a whole bunch of these, right? There we go, right? And each one's going to have post 1, post 2, post 3, post 5, and this will be content 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Everybody good? Right. So now I can send this over. Notice that this is being sent over to the view for rendering, right? So on the view side, right, I could just use the escape characters and do blog posts, right? I think that's what we called it, right? Blog posts, right? If I render this, notice that the view actually now has that JSON, right? This is an object, right? That is using a very common format called JSON, right? JavaScript object notation, right? Which is these combination of square brackets, curly brackets, right? And these name value pairs, right? That we call these attributes. We call these attributes or properties, right? And these are the values, right? So great. So the view has the content, right? It can render it. It doesn't know what to do with it, right? So it's just rendering as raw JSON. It doesn't know what to do with it, right? We haven't told it what to do. So that's the default behavior, right? To render it in raw format. Yes? Instead, what we would like to be able to do, right, is that we would like to take all these here, right, as if they were, notice that these are like, they're all rendering the same way, right? So what we'd like to be able to do is maybe use one of them as a template, right, to be able to render a whole bunch of them, right? All of them, right? We'd like to be able to take one of these and just iterate over them one after another, right? So let's do that. So let's grab this and let's put a div around this, right? Let's put a div around this and say, so this is a block, right? Block of HTML. It says I want to copy and paste this over and over, right? For every element in that array, right? So we can say, I want you to take this, right, and repeat this piece of div. I want you to repeat it for every post inside of the blog posts array, right? So this blog post array is declared here in the scope, and it's available right here. What this is going to do is just going to take this div, is going to copy and paste it as many blog posts as there are objects in that array. Make sense? Right? So if I refresh this, notice that my third post gets posted many times, as many objects as there are in the array, right? Which is pretty dumb, right? But at least we've seen that iterating over an array is trivial, right? We just have to use one of these ng repeats, right? Again, ng repeat is a attribute declared by the underlying Angular infrastructure, right? That has behavior associated with it. And we'll learn how to create our own attributes a little later, right? So that we can do things like this, right? For now, we're using the standard, we call these directives. These are directives declared by the Angular infrastructure. So instead of this post right here, right, this title, what I want to do is take that post object right here, post object, right, and render the title. See that? Right? And this paragraph, instead of having that content, just render the post dot content over here. See that? Right now I can go back and re-render this, and there they are. All the posts, right? And the contents rendered automatically from the array. Yes? This? Yeah, no, we just declare that as a local variable right here in the view. Yeah, and it's only available in this scope. That variable only lives inside of that div, right? Outside of that div, you're free to use the variable post again. Okay? So now we can remove all the static garbage down here, right? Because now we are dynamically rendering all these posts. Yes? Right? When we come back next time, we'll show you how to create titles and content and posts, and then add to that array so that we can dynamically generate this. Okay? All right, great. Thank you.